You remember The Matrix, right?
Holy shit!
It had groundbreaking special effects and changed the way action movies were made throughout the early 2000s. It was full of iconic scenes that are still referenced in pop culture over 20 years later. Well, one thing you might not remember about this beloved cultural icon is just how insanely cheesy it is. And I'm not talking about little things either. Like, the entire conceit of the movie is that human beings blotted out the sun during a war against solar-powered robots, so the robots decided to power themselves by harvesting electricity from unconscious human bodies. And every actor talks like they've never spoken to an actual human being before.
This isn't real.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
I hate this place. This zoo, this prison, this reality, whatever you want to call it. I can't stand it any longer. It's the smell.
But here's the thing, no one cares because The Matrix is awesome. It's got fun action scenes, and everyone dresses the way people in the 90s thought was cool, and it never gets confusing enough to get people bored. In fact, some people, myself included, go beyond not caring about the copious amounts of cheese this movie exudes, and believe it actually adds to the enjoyment of the film. In my opinion, the world needs more nonsensical, over-the-top action schlock, and that brings me to a little show no one seems to have heard of called Into the Badlands ran for 3 seasons from 2015 through 2019, and it seems to have had zero cultural impact whatsoever. I've never seen any ads for it, I've never met another person who's ever heard of it, I haven't even seen a single meme referencing it in all the time since it's come out. I only discovered it in late 2018 while I was scrolling through Netflix bored out of my mind, and came across this thumbnail and a description that made it sound like the kind of nonsense I could use to clip an hour of time before going to bed. It has since become my favorite show, and I figured that because the world is in quarantine, this would be as good a time as any to spread the word of Into the Badlands to anyone who happens to come across this video. I've never actually made a YouTube video essay like this before, but I think you're supposed to organize it in... Into the Badlands breaks new ground by taking place in a post-apocalyptic world where people are squabbling over resources and every problem is solved through violence. What it lacks in originality, it makes up for in bluntness when the opening narration of the show looks the audience dead in the eye and says that guns have been outlawed, so people fight each other with swords instead. Just outlawed, you know? So the roving packs of outlaws that attack and kidnap people? They use swords and spears and clubs, but not guns. Those are outlawed. And in later seasons, when some characters leave the Badlands and get to see what society looks like outside, no guns there either. That's just how outlawed they are. The creators just wanted to make a show about people fighting with swords, and I have to respect just how much they don't care about it making sense. They do have crossbows though, which basically act like guns, except people won't question it as much when characters block crossbow bolts with their swords. Also, like any good post-apocalyptic story, normal everyday things are all given dumb names. The Badlands specifically refers to an area of the former USA divided into 7 territories, each of which are ruled by a baron, which is standard Hunger Games level world building so far. But the barons call their slaves cogs for some reason. They also call prostitutes dolls, and having sex is always referred to as wicking. But my favorite is that the baron soldiers are referred to as clippers.
Baron is the top of the chain, and then there's the Clipper Force.
And they want to be Clippers. They sort of get a little glimpse of everything that the Clippers get.
Now, normally, sci-fi and fantasy writers will try to come up with names that are, cool. But all I can think of when I hear people talk about sending out a squadron of clippers is...
Don't worry your cowardly ship, sir. I'll take care of everything with my Acme Monster hair clippers. Clippers! Come on, don't be a big baby.
Also, throughout the show, killing someone is constantly referred to as clipping them. And at first I thought that it was just if a baron sends a group of clippers to kill someone, that's clipping them. But no, anyone killing anyone else in any context is called clipping. And I just think that's hilarious.
What's Quinn gonna do to him?
Probably clip him as an example to the others.
Also, some people have superpowers because we're aiming for cliche bingo here. These people are called Dark Ones, and whenever they bleed, their eyes turn black and they get super strong and violent for a few seconds before passing out. The main premise of the show is about Sonny, the best Clipper.
He's the most decorated killer of Quinn's army of Clippers, and so therefore he has earned his way to become a regent through his fighting prowess.
Finding a Dark One named MK, and MK wants to find his mom and escape the Badlands, but Sonny is super loyal to his Baron and is conflicted about helping him. He also has a secret pregnant wife, and he's worried that the Badlands isn't the best place to raise a kid, especially since there's a new Baron called the Widow who wants to steal MK's Dark One powers in order to rule the Badlands herself. It gets more complicated in seasons 2 and 3, but that's the gist of it. And there's probably a couple questions growing in the back of your mind that I want to address first. So, 1, yes, the main plot of season 1 of Into the Badlands involves the main characters trying to get out of the Badlands. And 2, no, despite characters with names like Sonny and MK and eventually Baji, this show doesn't really have anything to do with Journey to the West. It doesn't share any of the major themes or the overarching plot, and I don't really know why they added some very superficial similarities to it. It's possible that the show writers may have intended for the show to have more in common with the 16th century Chinese epic, but it becomes clear from the many retcons that develop as the show goes on that if they did have some kind of long-term plan for the plot, they didn't follow it. Really, the only thing that does stay consistent across all 32 episodes is the third and final season of Into the Badlands was finishing up in spring of 2019, so I was watching it regularly when John Wick 3 came out in theaters. I went to see it because the first one is one of my favorite movies, but I was surprised to find myself bored during most of the fight scenes, which I attribute at least in part to being used to the fast-paced, over-the-top action in Into the Badlands. I don't think many people will disagree with me when I say that Into the Badlands has some of the best hand-to-hand action scenes in live-action Western media. They are extremely creative and well-coordinated and contain lots of long takes and wide shots, so you can always tell what's going on and fully appreciate the action taking place. All the actors have to train for several weeks before shooting, with additional training between seasons, including not just martial arts, but stunts and wire work as well.
We started production, we trained like 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day, 5 days a week for 5 weeks. And it was grueling. I mean, it's terrible, honestly, to tell you the truth. Like, I felt bad, but I was also the one driving them through it.
And so for the actors that don't know how to fight, we train them and get them to do the best moves they can possibly do.
Basically, every one of us have our own individual backgrounds in martial arts, whether it be kickboxing, security work, football, just picking up somebody slamming. We have a wrestler on here. Some guys are kung fu.
And the show was overseen by executive producers Daniel Wu and Stephen Fung, veterans of the Hong Kong film industry who are specifically chosen for their martial arts expertise.
Got a 5-man team from Hong Kong as well, and each of them are good with their very specific kind of martial arts. So some are wushu, and then some are tai chi. And we have one expert in, doing like different kind of form and stances.
Every episode has at least 2 or 3 action scenes, and all of them are fantastic to watch. You might think that having so much action would detract from the plot and get tedious after a while, but 1, the plot is really just a vehicle for producing fantastic action scenes. 2, minimizing the number of scenes where characters have to talk out loud actually improves the plot. And 3, the action set pieces are so varied that they never become repetitive. I'm pretty sure that across all 3 seasons, there are only 2 locations that get multiple fight scenes. Every other fight gets its own unique set piece, from a graveyard to a chimney top to an abandoned mall full of mannequins to a creepy clown carnival. They also give the characters distinct fighting styles. So when you watch a fight between Quinn and the Widow, or Sonny and Zephyr, there are clear differences in their techniques that keep them unique even if they're both using the same weapon. And they are not always using the same weapon. One of the best fights in Season 1 has Sonny and the Widow fighting in a weapons vault, where they are constantly dropping and picking up new weapons. And I don't know if you've ever wanted to see Nick Frost use an octopus as nunchucks, but that's the thing that happens in this show. Even the episode titles are based off martial arts techniques, like Sting of the Scorpion's Tail, 2 Tigers Subdue Dragon, and Blind Cannibal Assassins. And in case you're wondering, how serious does this show actually take itself? I'm just going to show you this. And this. let you decide for yourself. You may have also noticed that unlike a lot of shows that take place in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, the show isn't all grungy and desaturated looking, and a lot of scenes contain a lot of bright and thematically relevant colors. I don't normally pay a lot of attention to the costume design in the media I consume, but the characters' clothing is clearly designed to help them stand out during fight scenes and to flow in a way that accentuates the characters' movements. And I personally think that they just look really cool. If I didn't mind spending half an hour just putting on belts every morning, I'd be happy to dress up like this to go out to the, wait, it's quarantine, Okay, look, I understand that people in movies don't talk the same way as people in real life.
So we have a different kind of shark. The human kind.
Everyone suspends their disbelief and goes along with the cheesy one-liners and overly dramatic pauses. But this show is one of the worst I've ever seen in terms of unnatural dialogue.
Nomads ambushed a transporter a couple miles back. Killed all the cogs, except one.
It's honestly probably worse than The Matrix.
Guns. Lots of guns.
I was tempted to call this section bad writing, but there are aspects of the characters and plot points that are written pretty well and develop convincingly as the show goes on. I was also tempted to call this section bad acting, but there's a lot of characters played by a lot of actors and all their lines are like this. So I'm inclined to lean towards it being the people who write the dialogue's fault. But don't worry. There is bad acting. Some actors are clearly able to handle the material better than others, and in my opinion, the worst two are our leads, Sunny and MK.
I could have killed you.
But you didn't.
Now maybe next time you should just kill me first.
Now, like I said, Daniel Wu has a lot of acting experience, and he might be really good in other things he's starred in, but he is impossible to take seriously in any scene of this show where he opens his mouth.
Or what? You're gonna kill me? Just like you killed those people on that boat?
I like Cat in the Hat better.
He can pull off an action scene convincingly enough, but for some reason they keep putting him in scenes where he's supposed to be delivering serious lines.
Pilgrim's trying to build an army of dark ones. He needs to be stopped now before it's too late.
There's a reason Keanu Reeves has only a couple of lines in all of John Wick, and it's because the people in charge of making it watched him in The Matrix and took notes. In the opening scene of the show, the way Sunny speaks in this faux badass way reminds me of how Abed would parody the cliche action hero on Community.
I see a man using a social disorder as a procedural device.
So my personal headcanon for the show is that it actually all takes place in Abed's mind. Wouldn't be the weirdest thing Community's done. MK isn't quite as bad, but it's made funnier by the fact that he's supposed to turn into this badass rage monster that everyone's super afraid of, but he talks like a 14-year-old who watches too much anime.
You really think I don't see through your bullshit? You're gonna cut me, aren't you? I lied because I was scared. You know what your mother wants to do.
The other characters are a little better, and you can tell that the actors are really doing their best with the material they're given. Emily Beecham as the widow clearly knows how cheesy her lines are and fully embraces it.
I want you to deliver a message to your Baron. I've reclaimed my oil fields. If he tries to take them back, there will be blood, and most of it will be his.
And Martin Sokus as Baron Quinn just goes all out and chews the scenery in every scene he's in.
Are you ready to be that spark of liberation?
Are you willing to die in the flames of the inferno? Yes, sir! Then let's burn this world to the ground.
The only actor that manages to pull off their lines convincingly is Nick Frost as Baji. I have no idea how he's able to do it, but he somehow manages to make lines that are just as unrealistic as everyone else's sound natural.
What do you want me to say? He's going to wake up in an hour with a big smile on his face and a spring in his step? Huh? I'm sorry to burst your sentimental bubble, my friend, but it's not going to happen.
And watching him have a conversation with other characters really highlights the huge disparity between them.
Give me the keys. What did I just tell you?
They have my friend, a boy.
Well, we'll get you another boy. Just forget about him.
I feel like I'm just starting to list characters now, so I might as well get to... Like I said before, Into the Badlands has a lot of characters, and most of them are surprisingly well written for a show that focuses so much on flashy action scenes. But of course, I want to start with the bad ones. Sunny is a really bland character. He sort of undergoes a bit of development technically because he starts off loyal to his Baron and happy to kill people, and then stops being either of those things. But the problem is, that change is completed a few episodes in, and for the rest of the show, his only personality trait is wants to protect his family.
I don't care what happens to me, just as long as I can save my son.
Which isn't a bad trait to have, but also isn't particularly exciting. He doesn't seem to have any other interests, or a sense of humor, or any quirks to make him really interesting. But boy, does he sure care about his family. Incidentally, the one member of his family that isn't a newborn baby is a much more interesting character. Vale is one of the few characters in the show that isn't any good at fighting, and therefore has to solve problems using intelligence and strategy, which can be a nice change of pace whenever she's on screen.
Vale is one of the only good people in the Badlands.
She's a doctor and knows how to read, and is generally a very easy character to root for because 1, she's a mother who's trying to protect her newborn son, and 2, unlike Sunny, who's just an unstoppable badass that you always expect to successfully fight his way out of any conflict, Vale is constantly at a disadvantage, and watching her struggle and fail to escape the situations she's forced into by physically stronger characters makes her success much more cathartic. Also, to go on a bit of a tangent, this show has a lot of characters played by women and people of color, and no one celebrated it as a triumph for diversity for some reason. Like, the show's lead is an Asian American character in a healthy relationship with a woman of color, and of the 14 characters listed as main characters on Wikipedia, 7 are women and 6 are people of color. There's only one major LGBT character, but at least she's explicitly shown to be in a lesbian relationship, rather than just hinting at it or queerbaiting. But there are other minor characters that fall into the LGBT category, and this is never treated as taboo or even unusual.
Look, I don't care who you're with, but don't you forget what I told you about Sonny. Don't you let some crush cloud your good judgment, because that kind of thing can get you killed.
In fact, there's no discrimination based on gender, race, or sexual orientation by any characters throughout the show, with the exception of Quinn being the only Baron to not have any female Clippers. The only basis of discrimination is status. And to be clear, I'm probably not the most qualified person to talk about what makes minority representation good, because, as you might be able to tell from my voice, I've never had much of an issue finding characters who look like me in television and movies. But I think a lot of the representation in the show is pretty positive. For example, of the 7 barons who rule the 7 territories at the beginning of the show, 2 are women and 3 are people of color, which is at least more diverse than the current US government. Aramis Knight, who plays MK, is also of Indian and Pakistani descent. Pilgrim and Cressida are technically antagonists, but still competent and respected main characters played by actors of color in Season 3. Nathaniel Moon, one of the most skilled fighters in the show, is a black man who ends up in a relationship with a white woman, and also has a physical disability. And then there's the Master, possibly the most powerful character in the show's whole universe, who is a woman of color. Also, like I said before, the characters aren't just one-dimensional stereotypes, and receive surprisingly good development throughout the series. Lydia is Baron Quinn's first wife, who also isn't much of a fighter, but has a lot of experience planning and strategizing after helping him rule for so long. And it's interesting to watch her try to adapt and stay in a position of power as the world of the show changes around her. The actor who plays her also happens to be older than the actor who plays her husband, which is an unusual and refreshing thing to see in mainstream television.
They say something like, she's a capable lawyer in her 40s, but she's still quite attractive. And in this instance, I just read a woman who, although she is being I would say cruelly rejected by her husband, she's not going to go down lightly.
At first, she's dismissive of Quinn's newest wife, Jade, for being just some naive girl with a pretty face, but she comes to realize that she has her own ways of being cunning and manipulative, and they eventually manage to cautiously respect each other.
She sees Lydia as a goal. I want to be that woman. I guess in the Badlands, how you do that is you take them down.
She also has a son named Ryder, who's one of the least likable characters in the show, but at least it's on purpose. He's portrayed as a weak, sniveling man-child who really wants to be Baron someday but is just incompetent at everything, and his family sees him as an embarrassment, which makes him pretty relatable.
In his own head, at least, he is the natural heir to Quinn's throne.
MK is also pretty unlikable, but I think the showrunners realized that the bratty, superpowered teenager wasn't an audience favorite, and he stops being one of the main protagonists somewhere in Season 2. Tilda basically undergoes the same character arc as Sunny, but more interestingly. She starts out extremely loyal to the widow, but you get to gradually watch her become more and more disillusioned and independent as she questions the widow's methods, rather than realizing, oh, my Baron is an awful person and also crazy, in the very first episode, and then never changing an opinion after that.
Even though she's not 6 feet tall and a man, she is a force to be reckoned with. Her whole world is without violence.
And then there's Baji, the only comic relief character who spends 90% of his time hanging out with only Sunny, the show's most serious character. Nick Frost makes his character just so damn likable, and like I said before, he's actually able to convincingly read his terrible lines somehow, and it's really satisfying to watch this big fat goofy character kick people's asses when he finally gets a fight scene. There are two characters that I keep bringing up and haven't gone into detail with yet because I've been saving the best for last. The Widow is introduced as the show's main antagonist, and at first she seems like just another case of invincible strong female character syndrome that just has to be perfect at everything because that's how the show initially frames her. But you gradually realize that this isn't the case at all. She actually loses a lot of fights and is constantly struggling and doubting herself, and her reasons for being such a skilled fighter are properly explained. In my opinion, the most impressive thing that the show's writers did was introducing MK, the lost boy who can't control his superpowers and wants to save his mom, as the main protagonist, and the Widow, a bloodthirsty, illegitimate Baron who wants to kill all the other Barons and rule the Badlands herself, as the main antagonist, and then gradually switch their roles so the Widow becomes the protagonist and MK becomes the antagonist while they retain those same motivations. She doesn't get reformed or shown the error of her ways by the protagonists or anything like that. You just gradually realize that she was in the right all along. I started the show being annoyed at how easily the Widow would slice through endless waves of male clippers without breaking a sweat. And by the end of season 2, I was screaming at the other characters to just stop being so mean to the Widow. Can't you see she's trying to help you? It's not something I've seen a lot of other shows do, and I really wish I could get into how cathartic the show's ending is. But I actually want other people to watch this show without having the whole thing spoiled for them. So for now, I'm just going to move on. That's right, Quinn gets a whole category all to himself.
How can we hold a conversation if you won't admit the truth?
Where do I even start with Quinn? Well, he's Sunny's Baron and is therefore introduced as someone we're supposed to side with because Sunny likes him and the Widow hates him. But right off the bat, it's pretty obvious that he's a bad person. For one thing, the first thing we see him do is introduce himself to a bunch of child soldiers as some kind of creepy cult leader.
Most of you are orphans. Your parents died after a life of servitude and left you to pay off their debt. But I'm offering you a different path. The strongest among you will have the opportunity to train as one of my clippers.
And he's engaged to a much younger woman while his current wife and son are still around because, like I said before, he's kind of sexist.
Boys, I'm not asking you to be monks. You can wick whatever you want.
And he straight up murders an elderly doctor and his wife for diagnosing him with a brain tumor. So yeah, he's not a good guy. Why is he my favorite character then? Am I actually some kind of misogynist? I did make that comment about invincible strong female character syndrome earlier. And this is my first YouTube video, so you probably don't really know any of my political opinions. Unless you know me in real life, in which case, this is actually pretty embarrassing. Please never speak of this to me. For the rest of you, this should go without saying, but you don't have to agree with a character in order to like them. Lots of people consider Darth Vader to be their favorite character in Star Wars, and that doesn't mean they agree with his political opinions. It just means they like being choked. There's three main things that make Quinn a great character. One is Martin Sokus' performance. Quinn is going crazy because of the aforementioned tumor growing in his head, and Sokus is just going all out with the insane line deliveries.
Why'd you hesitate?
So every time Quinn is on screen, he's just so fun to watch.
Did you miss me?
The second part is that despite being a terrible person, his motivations are really easy to understand even though you don't agree with him. He wants to continue being the most powerful Baron and ruling through violence, and he believes that preserving the oppressive system is justified because he lived through it himself. He started out as a cog under a cruel Baron and gradually worked his way up to being a Clipper, and then head Clipper, and then eventually killed his Baron to take his place. He hates the Widow because she became Baron by killing her husband in his sleep, like a coward.
They recognized me, Teague. I'll accept Quinn.
And he hates his son because he doesn't believe he'd ever be strong enough to kill him and take his place. And he doesn't want to leave his territory to someone who doesn't earn it. The system worked out great for him, so why would he want to change it? All those years of slaving away would go to waste if he didn't get some slaves of his own out of it. Like I said, you're not supposed to agree with him because he's basically just being the ultimate boomer, but he does have clearly understandable motivations. The best thing about Quinn, though, is that he's just so competent. You know when you're watching a horror movie and the characters are all acting like idiots and you're frustrated because you know that you would act just so much more rationally in their situation?
We should call 911 on my fully charged cell phone, lock the doors, and then stand back to back in the middle of the room holding knives.
Quinn is the exact opposite of that. He constantly outmaneuvers every other character in the show, and it's just so satisfying to watch him solve his problems using the most straightforward, logical solutions. All the other characters are constantly underestimating him and coming up with strategies to take him down that seem like they make a lot of sense and should work. And then Quinn turns around and is like, "Obviously I took precautions in case you tried to escape or kill me. I didn't become the most powerful baron in the Badlands by letting my guard down. And having this tumor destroying my brain isn't going to make me less paranoid." I want to keep the spoilers in this video to a minimum, but I will give one example. In Season 2, there's a point where Quinn's hiding out in an abandoned subway station with a bunch of Clippers loyal to him. And Lydia finds out and takes a bunch of her Clippers to try to kill him because he threatened her son Ryder. It seems like a really good plan because she doesn't think Quinn knows she knows where he is, so they'll be able to take his Clippers by surprise. But it turns out Quinn actually rigged the main entrance to explode if anyone went in, so a bunch of Lydia's Clippers are clipped or injured right away, and Quinn's men are alerted to their presence. It didn't rely on Quinn having some supernatural knowledge of the future because it's not unreasonable to assume one of his many enemies would eventually find out where he was. And it didn't rely on other characters acting distractingly stupid because, yeah, if you find out where your enemy's hiding, the reasonable thing to do is send a bunch of Clippers in to take them by surprise. This is just one example, but characters are constantly underestimating Quinn because they think he's a crazy old man. And to be fair, he is a crazy old man, and his brain is literally deteriorating, but he still manages to stay one step ahead of everyone else, and it's just so satisfying to see an intelligent character acting intelligently and having it pay off. This is made even more impressive by the fact that, unlike Vale or Lydia, who are cunning and strategic but no good at fighting, Quinn is possibly the best fighter in the Badlands. He's the one who trained Sonny.
So I took him in, forged him into the man you see today.
And despite being old and mentally unstable, he can still easily take on other skilled fighters like the Widow. I find myself kind of actually rooting for him because it just seems like he deserves to win, you know? He comes up with the best plans and is super charismatic, and he's spent decades working hard to be the horrific monster that he is today. I know I said before that any non-fight scenes in this show are just vehicles to get to the fight scenes, but honestly, any scenes with Quinn in them are exceptions. Every second he's on screen is a joy to watch, and his character perfectly captures the show's tone of being simultaneously really badass and over-the-top goofy. Into the Badlands was cancelled after 3 seasons due to low viewership. I don't know how much the show cost per episode, but it wasn't cheap looking, and I understand their decision. Fortunately, the conclusion was pretty satisfying, with most of Season 3's plot threads being nicely tied up, and our main characters receiving endings that ranged from perfectly acceptable to really good. The last few minutes of the show try to set up some new arcs for Season 4, but the thing they don't tell you about works of fiction is that they aren't actually real. The characters and events only exist inside your head. So if you decide that for you, the last few minutes never happened and the show ended in a conclusive way, there's nothing anyone can do to stop you. Trust me, I do it all the time.
There is no God in the Badlands.
So yeah, that's my favorite show, Into the Badlands. I get that it's not for everyone because people have different tastes and opinions on media like this are subjective, but if you're the kind of person who likes good action and cheesy dialogue, and you're trapped in quarantine looking for something to binge on Netflix while the world outside goes to shit, might I recommend a little show about a world without gun violence, where women lead revolutions, racism is non-existent, and LGBT acceptance is at an all-time high. When real life is a depressing hellscape, there's never been a better time to escape in... Thanks for watching this whole video. I've never done anything like this before, so any kind of feedback would be appreciated. Liking this video would really boost my ego if that's something you feel like I deserve. And if you've seen this show, comment what you think of it, and if you think this video did it justice. You can subscribe if you want. I'll probably make some more videos someday if this one goes over well. Unless, of course, Daniel Wu watches this video and doesn't like how I insulted his acting and decides to come over to my house and clip me.